Hey, welcome back. It's November 15th and the current Bitcoin price is just over $90,500. Today's title of this episode is Bitcoin as a Supreme Asset, and I'm going to give you my justifications as to why it is indeed the supreme asset in human history. So this first slide puts out its running history ever since it's been, since its inception in 2009, and it's to 2024, so it has a 15-year history. It originally started out around 10 US dollar cents back in 2010, and now, as I've just said, we're 90,000k today, but we're going to be reaching its 100k by the end of this year, most certainly, and beyond. So you can see the difference between where we began in 2010. You can see, we've reached just over 1 million X in the last 14 years. This next slide, I find it really interesting because it really puts it into simple monetary terms that anyone can understand. So CAGR is like the compound annual growth rate. It's the rate of return every year. And if you add it in a compound fashion, it comes up with these set of figures. And it makes the comparison since Bitcoin's inception, year 1, all the way through to year 14 currently, across 3 different asset classes: Bitcoin, gold, and the S&P 500 in the United States. If you look at Bitcoin, you can see at the very beginning of its journey, if you started at 10 US cents to now almost $90,000 to $100,000, you can understand why. You can see 3-digit growth figures in its early years. And then towards the middle end, you can see it's into the double-digit range. And then particularly in the last few years, and even year 15, you can see it's recovering back to its original 3-digit growth per annum. So that's the Bitcoin statistic. You can see it's absolutely horrendous, right? It's just incredible to see how these fantastic rates of return figures. Now, if you compare this with gold, we can see it's pretty much started at high in year 1, 15 years ago, 29%, 21%, and you can see it's going back to its single-digit growth. So it's lost ground during the course of time. And S&P, you can see similarly, it's more or less the same sort of outcome, where it started out 15 years ago being 30% annual rate of return growth for the S&P 500 stock, and it's gone back to the lower lower double-digit range of 12%. Now, incidentally, 12% is like the actual nominal rate of return if you compare it with the cost of capital, i.e. the inflation rate in the US and also in the rest of the Western world. It's the same inflation rate. On average, in the last 100 years, has always been between 10 to 12, 30%. So you can see that S&P 500 overall has managed to retain its wealth preservation, right, in terms of its purchasing power. In contrast with gold, where you've seen it's lost its purchasing power, which is in stark contrast. If you compare gold and S&P 500 with Bitcoin, you can see it paints an entirely different picture. It's created more wealth. And what's interesting, you can see that the last 5 years of Bitcoin's annual growth, or the CAGR rate, on average in the last 5 years has been 155% every year for the past 5 years. If you compare the last 5 figures in gold and in S&P 500, it actually dwarfs both sets of statistics. So that's phenomenal. Now, moving on to the next slide. This is an interesting slide that I pulled together. It actually demonstrates the Mag 7, so the top tech stock in the S&P 500 in comparison to Bitcoin in terms of how it actually reached its first $1 trillion market cap milestone, and also the time within which these companies have reached this $1 million market cap. So if we start off with Microsoft, everyone knows what Microsoft is. And it took them 44 years since its inception to actually reach its first $1 trillion market cap. If you compare the same situation with Apple, it's taken them slightly less time than Microsoft, but just by a couple of years, to 42 years. Amazon, it took them 24 years. Google, 21 years. And this is the interesting point. Bitcoin has taken them 12 years. I repeat that, 12 years to reach its first $1 trillion market cap. And I've also added the last column, which demonstrates the percentages for each of these companies and asset classes. Ever since its first $1 trillion, this is the average CAGR rate ever since then. So in the case of Microsoft, it's 24%. In Apple, it's 18%. Amazon, 44%. Google, 26.5%. And here it is, Bitcoin. Since its first $1 trillion market cap, it's averaged almost 240% compound annual growth rate, CAGR. Absolutely amazing. This slide explains why Bitcoin is indeed currently the only asset in history which is the fastest running horse. It certainly has outperformed all the large cap stocks, bonds and real estate. It has hit its first $1 trillion market cap in 12 years, which is record time for any equities or securities or even indeed commodities. So Bitcoin has actually toppled all of them in the shortest time possible. And certainly it's on track to be $1 million worth of Bitcoin within 10 years. I want to talk about its main use cases for Bitcoin. As you know, Bitcoin is the digital money. It's a digital asset, digital capital asset. That is its mnemonic, its kind of tag use case for Bitcoin. And if we were to break that down into 4 sub use cases, this is what I think what they are. It really is about money that you can safely keep away from the clutches of the traditional financial systems like the banks and the government. Particularly for the developing world, there are currently unbanked. What do I mean by unbanked? That they can't open up a new bank account in, let's say, in Nigeria or any other developing world nation. So Bitcoin for them, this use case is fairly interesting, right? Because really Bitcoin is meant to be egalitarian in the sense that it's open to all to be able to participate. The second point is money indeed can be sent anywhere at any time in a matter of a few minutes. The third use case is it can indeed be converted into any local currency fairly quickly. And the fourth point, money increases in value over time. For me, this is the ultimate use case. The mention of the word value, i.e. the store of value, is for me the top most valuable use case that Bitcoin has. Which leads me to this next slide. Bitcoin's store of value, SOV, is the supreme use case among all available use cases I've articulated in the previous slide. So just bear that in mind, because it is indeed that ultimate savings technology that you're not going to find anywhere else in any of the asset classes that I mentioned earlier on. It topples them all. I want to leave you this last thought as to why I think you should invest in Bitcoin. It certainly has the highest CAGR, right? Averaging 155% the last 5 years. You're not going to find that in any other asset classes. Point number 1. Point number 2, all traditional asset classes have indeed took much longer to reach its first $1 trillion market cap. And the last reason why I think you should invest in Bitcoin, it is the best performing asset class that has the largest market cap in the shortest time in the world, which is set to indeed overtake other traditional asset classes. We've got many milestones that we've achieved. We've got the spot Bitcoin ETFs that's been approved in US and in other countries around the world, which means it's an entry point for institutional investors to start having exposure to Bitcoin underlying. Nation states adoption have recognized that they need to add Bitcoin into its national reserves, and you might have heard that President Trump is most likely going to be including Bitcoin as a US strategic reserve asset in its national treasury, which is great. Third, we have other pension fund providers, public and private, who are in rampant activity in making initial small allocations to Bitcoin between 3 to 5%, which is the average allocation percentage, but that's certainly going to be increasing a much larger amount in the weeks and months to come. And of course, there's retail investors like you and I, right, who are believers in Bitcoin or starting to be in the less doubtful, skeptical stage and now moving on to, I need to do something more clever with my portfolio and savings and wealth, considering Bitcoin. So that last cohort, really review this video as many times as you want, and you'll quickly realize, in addition to doing your own research, you will quickly come to a rapid conclusion that you need to allocate small amounts of your wealth into Bitcoin because it is that leading asset class in terms of the ultimate savings technology to hold on to your wealth in the long run. So I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, please don't forget to hit that like button and indeed share the video, and more importantly to subscribe to my channel, because I put an awful lot of effort to create these videos, both educational and insight content. So I'd appreciate if you can subscribe to this channel, because it's the only way to be kept informed of new videos that I regularly publish. So I look forward to seeing you next time.